Manufacturers have always played a big part in Formula One, which leads people to call Formula One to be the playground of manufacturers. But for every success story there is one of absolute failure or waste of money with little to show for it. And then there are stories where a successful manufacturer manages to ruin their reputation with wrong decisions. And today we will look at such a case. Today we will look at Porsche's last Formula One season.
3 lights, 4 lights, 5 laps. Pause! Go, go, go!
Our story begins in 1987 when Porsche and McLaren had just ended their partnership, which had netted McLaren 3 drivers' titles and 2 constructors' titles. As Porsche did not have the resources to simultaneously comply with the rule changes to turbo engines in 1988 and to develop a natural aspirated engine for 1989, McLaren partnered with Honda for 1988 and onwards. This move would pay dividends as McLaren would win every title from 1988 to 1991. In 1988, McLaren came close to a perfect season until Senna ran afoul of Schlesser's Williams at the Monza Grand Prix.
Now here we see again what happened to Ayrton Senna. Well, we see for the first time. Car in front of him locking the brakes, and he definitely got in a tangle, and that was Schlesser, I think.
Yes, it was Jean-Louis Schlesser, and there will be no thanks from Ayrton Senna for that.
Meanwhile, Porsche kept searching for a new partner that could finance the development of a new engine, similar to the deal they had made with McLaren a few years prior. At first, there were talks with the Onyx team, who had a supposed strong financial backer with a Monitron company. But with Van Rossum pulling out in early 1990, this plan fell through. Porsche caught a lucky break when they were approached by the Arrows team. Arrows had been in Formula One for 12 years, but so far the big success had eluded them despite several strong performances. In 1990, team principal Jackie Oliver made a deal with Japanese businessman Wataru Ohashi, the owner of the footwork company. Ohashi would purchase a majority of footwork but leave Oliver as team principal due to his experience in Formula One. To bring Arrows from the midfield to the front runners, they needed a new engine supplier to replace the old Cosworth V8 engine, which was the go-to engine for most smaller teams. According to Jackie Oliver, they had the choice between the Works Ford V8 engine, which was also used by Benetton and Jordan in 1991, or they could go with Porsche. Ohashi insisted they sign a deal with Porsche, despite Porsche being out of F1 for 3 years at that point. Porsche, under the guide of their legendary engine designer Hans Metzger, began to design a V12 engine for the footwork team called the 3512 engine, the 3512 standing for 3.5 liters and 12 cylinders. On paper, this partnership looked strong. Footwork was providing the capital to not only design the Porsche engine but also to upgrade the team base in Milton Keynes. Alan Jenkins, who had joined Arrows in 1990 as replacement for Ross Brawn, was an experienced designer who had already worked with Porsche during their McLaren partnership. Furthermore, the driver pairing of Alboreto and Caffi was a good mix of experience and youthful talent. It even let Joe Savard exclaim, "With Porsche engines for the 1991 season, Arrows might finally chalk up a first win." Initially, Porsche planned to ready the engine for the last 2 Grand Prix in 1990, but this plan was scrapped due to time constraints. The first test showed some promise as the V12 was running reliably and its power output was spread evenly. Unfortunately, it also showed issues when Michele Alboreto began to push for faster lap times. The engine was large and overweight thanks to the unusual center power take, which was common in Porsche's 917 endurance cars, but unusual for an F1 engine. This led observers to comment that Porsche simply bolted 2 V6 engines together, and as a result it weighed an astonishing 190 kilos, while also only providing 670 HP. In comparison, the Ferrari V12 engine only weighed 150 kilos and provided 735 HP. In addition, the oil consumption in high-speed corners was a worrying factor, while the Jenkins-designed gearbox needed some work to get its bugs sorted out. But as the new season was slowly approaching, the work and testing continued as a complete new construction was deemed unfeasible, and as the problems were already known, it should have been easy to sort them out over time. Before we continue with our story, let's take a short look at the 1991 season. In comparison to today, F1 in the early 90s was very diverse in terms of number of teams and engine suppliers. Over the span of the 1991 season, 41 drivers and 19 teams competed for points. 11 drivers made their debut in 1991, including future F1 champions Michael Schumacher and Mika Häkkinen, as well as future car champion Alex Zanardi. 1991 also saw the first change of the point system in decades, with the first place now worth 10 instead of 9 points. The rest was unchanged, only the first 6 drivers would earn points. In terms of engine suppliers, 9 different engine suppliers competed against each other. These were the teams and their engine suppliers in 1991. Honda developed a brand new V12 engine for the 1991 season, which was used by McLaren while also supplying Tyrrell with their older V10 engine. This engine would be renamed to Mugen in 1992 and would be Honda's contact with F1 despite their official withdrawal at the end of the 1992 season. Renault kept its engagement small, only supplying Williams with their V10 engine. After a disastrous year in 1989, Yamaha returned to F1 with a brand new V12 engine, which they supplied to the Brabham team. A newcomer in F1, the Ilmor V10 engine was designed by Mario Ilian on behalf of the Leighton-House team. The engine proved to be competitive, though suffered from teething issues. A fun fact, this engine would become the basis for Mercedes' official return in 1994. Ford supplied their V8 Works engine to Benetton and the new Jordan team. In addition to that, they also supplied a good portion of the backmarkers, Lola, AGS, Fondmetal, Coloni, with their Cosworth engines, which often were prepared by tuning companies like Hart or Marder. The Judd company developed a brand new V10 engine, which was used by Dallara. They also supplied the cash-strapped Lotus team with their older V8 engines. Lamborghini not only supplied the Ligier team with their V12 engine, but also entered a semi-works team under the name of Modena, though they started as Lamborghini in the 1991 season. Ferrari of course had their own works team, but for a first time in their history, they supplied a customer team with their V12 engines. The Minardi team would not receive the latest engine though, but rather one spec behind the works team. And of course our main topic for this video. Porsche had returned to Formula 1 to supply footwork with its V12 engine. And with that we go back to our main story. Meanwhile, Jenkins began working on a new car for the 1991 season called the FA12. It was a rather conventional car, but one with a raised nose, something that was slowly becoming the norm in the coming years, though unlike Tyrrell or Benetton, the front wing was held by a single pylon. Unfortunately, what wasn't taken into account was the large engine. The engine would simply not fit in Jenkins' first version of the car, as both Porsche and Arrows had not cooperated to get the correct measurements. So in a desperate move they fitted the engine onto the old Arrows 11, which at this point was already 3 years old, and brought this car to the first 2 rounds of the 1991 season while redesigning the FA12. To be fair, Arrows wasn't the only team to start the 1991 season with a modified pre-season car. Benetton, Brabham, Fondmetal and AGS also started the season with modified pre-season cars, though with the exception of Benetton, those teams did it more for the lack of funds, which was something Arrows could not claim at this point. The first race of the 1991 season was at Phoenix, and as expected, the old Arrows did not perform well. Thanks to the 2 points from last season, Arrows was spared the pre-qualifying session for the first half of this season, but qualifying would show the hard reality. While Alboreto managed to get his car on P25 on the grid, he was 5.6 seconds slower than pole-sitter Senna, while his teammate Caffey failed to qualify. The race itself wasn't much better for the Arrows team. Alboreto stayed at the back of the field for the entire race until he had to retire on lap 46 with a failed gearbox. Ironically, this would prove to be the second best result for arrows-porsche the entire season. The next race in Brazil was even worse. Both cars failed to qualify, with Caffey in P27 almost 1 second behind the time to qualify in P26. But for Porsche race director Max Welti, this was an expected result, as the track showed the weaknesses of the old A11. He also stated that things should turn around with the coming debut of the FA12 at the next race in Imola. Little did he know though that things would just get worse. The FA12 was ready for the Imola Grand Prix, and Arrows gave the car an initial shakedown in Silverstone. They weren't the only team to bring a new car to Imola. Benetton, Brabham and Fondmetal also brought new cars for the race. The race weekend started with a literal bang for the team when Alboreto crashed heavily at the Tamburello corner. Despite needing 15 stitches in his leg and 2 cracked ribs, Alboreto continued on that weekend. Unfortunately, his car could not be repaired for the race, so he had to use the old A11, while Caffey's role was to show the potential of the new car. Unfortunately, the FA12 was only marginally faster than the old A11. Caffey was almost 2 seconds behind the time needed for P26 and almost 9 seconds behind pole setter Senna. Additionally, the new car had its own teething problems. The fast corners of Imola showed the oil system issues from pre-season testing were still there, while Alboreto seemed to have no straight line speed. Max Welti acknowledged those problems but was also hopeful as the team knew where the issues were and that they could now concentrate on solving them. The next race was in Monaco and it started with good news for Arrows. They had managed to rebuild Alboreto's car so now both drivers could use the FA12. But during free practice, Caffey had a horrible accident.
A huge accident on Saturday morning involving Alex Caffey. His luck ran out when his new footwork collided with the barriers. He too was out of the race. Studying the replay, it's amazing that from such a collision, Caffey could emerge relatively unscathed. Indeed, it's a testament to the improved safety standards in Formula One that he was not seriously injured. The car was a write-off. It was lifted off the track in segments. The whole of the back end totally ripped away from the rest of the chassis.
Unlike Imola though, Caffey was not able to continue the weekend and so all hopes rested on Alboreto's shoulder to qualify for the race. Alboreto managed to put the car on P25, 4.2 seconds behind pole setter Senna. At the race, Alboreto again stuck at the end of the field until the engine failed in lap 39. These laps were also the longest run the car had managed in one session, showing how clearly underdeveloped it still was. Behind the scenes, Jenkins was losing hope with the ungainly Porsche engine and asked Brian Hart to ready some Ford V8 DFR engines for use in the FA12. The required modifications would take time though, so for the next 2 races they were stuck with Porsche. For the coming race in Canada, there was a change of drivers. Caffey had been involved in a car crash and had suffered a broken jaw and cheekbone, cuts and concussion. As replacement, Arrows hired Stefan Johansson, who had started the season at AGS but had been replaced with Fabrizio Barbazza in Imola. This time both cars would qualify for the race, with Alboreto in P21 and Johansson in P25. But the practice and qualifying sessions had shown more engine woes and the race would not be much better. Johansson suffered a sticking throttle at the start and had to come into the pits on lap 1. Meanwhile, Alboreto had managed to actually overtake several cars driving as high as P15 before he suffered from the same issue as his teammate. When he came to the pit, Johansson was still there and in the hectic pit stop, Alboreto's engine overheated. Johansson was able to continue but stuck at the end of the field until the engine expired on lap 48. The last race for arrows-porsche was in Mexico and the track would show every weakness of the car and engine. Back in the 90s, the track was very different from today, with fast changing corners and a challenging Peraltada corner. As an example, this is from the 1990 race in Mexico. These characteristics would tax the engine and the oil system to the maximum, and it would lead to the failure of 4 of the 8 engines before the race even started. Alboreto managed to qualify in P26, 4.4 seconds behind pole setter Patrese, but Johansson failed to qualify. The race itself was just as bad, as Alboreto had to start from the pits after he had caused 1 out of a total of 3 restarts. His race lasted 24 laps before his engines failed again. This marked the end of the Arrows and Porsche partnership. From the French Grand Prix onwards, Arrows would use Ford V8 DFR engines, but they would quickly show that the FA12 was not a competitive car. It would take until the 13th race in Portugal until Arrows finally finished the race, and the last race in Australia would only be the second race where both cars qualified. While Arrows and Porsche worked behind the scenes to continue the partnership, the deal ended at the end of 1991, and for 1992 Arrows signed a deal with Mugen. The Mugen partnership lasted until the end of 1993 and ended together with the Arrows Footwork partnership, but this is a story for another day. So what actually brought this seemingly promising partnership to such a rapid end? The reasons are several. While the Porsche engine certainly takes a huge part of it, as it was simply outdated to compete with modern engines, it wasn't the only factor. Arrows and Porsche never really worked together, as shown with the not fitting engine at the start of the season. This also led to the problems with the oil system of the FA12, as it simply could not handle the demands of the engine. And as the results were not as expected, accusations soon began to rise within the team. As Ron Dennis once said, for a successful partnership, both parties have to start on a blank piece of paper, and in this case, both sides did not work with one piece of paper but rather separate pieces. But this was also somewhat typical of the Formula 1 in the early 90s. Long-term partnerships were rare, as most of the teams switched engine suppliers almost on a yearly basis, depending on their finances for each season. For Porsche itself, their F1 adventure was over. While they had begun working on a brand new V10 engine, this project was halted as they had to concentrate on road cars again. But the design was not forgotten, as it was later reused for the Carrera GT and later further modified into a V8 engine for the hugely successful Porsche RS Spyder. So while this short F1 adventure did damage Porsche's reputation, they still managed to turn this disaster into a successful comeback, albeit not in Formula 1. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video, and if so, please like and comment. Until next time, and keep it respectful.